by show of hands, how many of you have either seen the movie or read the book Contact? The movie had Jodie Foster. Okay, all right, it was kind of an EM movie, but, right, it has one of my all-time favorite scenes from any movie or book, and it is the scene where the lead character, Ellie, who's played by Jodie Foster, is being prepped to go through the wormhole, right? And they don't know what's going to be on the other side, but to meet the super intelligent alien. And they're trying to prep her and figure out what's going on. And someone asks the question, and they say, okay, if you can only ask this super intelligent ET one question, right? What would that question be? And so she says, how did you do it, right? How did you evolve? How did you survive this technological adolescence without killing yourself? And even though the rest of that movie kind of sucked, but that question to me stuck, right? I was like, man, that is such a big, profound question. Most of my friends in that same situation would have been like, what's the meaning of life? Did you build the pyramids, right? I mean, it would have been stuff like that. This particular question was incredibly selfless. It was incredibly grand, and it was just so forward-thinking. And so I thought a lot about that after I saw the movie, and it occurred to me that it really wasn't Ellie in the movie asking the question. It was the author, Carl Sagan, right? That was his question. And then what really kind of blew my mind, right, in thinking about it is I realized that whole book and then the following movie was just a device to raise that question, to bring attention to this issue, right? This issue of ultimate importance. It's how did you survive this technological, he's saying, how can we survive our technological adolescence? Well, if you've been watching the news, you know his concerns are not just his own, right? This is a guy named Martin Rees, who's the Royal Astronomer, has a new book out called Our Final Hour, and in it he lays out the case why he believes humanity has a 50-50 shot for getting through 2100. 50-50, okay? Stephen Hawking can make you feel a little bit better. He's a little more generous. Maybe 200 years, right? 100 to 200 years. But then we got to get off the planet, right? We got to do something else. We got to go elsewhere. Elon Musk, in a recent interview for Wired, right? The interviewer asks him and says, what do you think cars are going to look like in 20 years? And he says, in all seriousness, I hope civilization is around in 20 years. Okay? One more. Jason Boxin, this is kind of one of my favorite ones. He's kind of nerdy glaciologist, right? And he's out and he's taking kind of methane levels in seawater and discovers in certain areas they're 10 times kind of what they ought to be. And so in an unguarded moment, he emotes to Twitter, basically, we're effed, right? So people kind of omit the rest. I felt obligated to include the whole quote here, but basically, he was like, man, if that's really going down, we're really in bad shape. And so what's going on here, right? These are not your garden variety doomsayers, right? These are very respected thinkers, starting with Sagan and moving forward. Is there something more going on? There seems to be 3 exponential trends that's cause for concern, right? The first is the accelerating rate of technology. And so if you look at this curve, this is the exponential curve, and on the y-axis, you have the number of calculations per second, right, for $1,000. So instead of $1,000, just think of it, if you want to go buy a laptop, how much computing power can you get for your laptop? Okay. If that curve holds, right, if that exponential holds, in 2020 to 2025, you will be able to go and buy a laptop with the computing capacity of the human brain. Okay? That's not that far off, right? I mean, that's right around the corner. Okay? If this curve holds to 2050, right, the nature of an exponential progression, that $1,000 laptop will have the computing capacity of the sum of all human brains on Earth, right? That's a huge amount. So why is that cause for concern? Well, that's cause for concern because that's such rapid change, right? Things are moving so quickly, we can't even forecast what's going to happen beyond that point. Also, it's just the nature of technology that as things get more powerful, right, fewer and fewer people have bigger levers to cause damage. So there's good with that, right? There's lots of solutions coming out of that, but fewer people can do harm. So that's one exponential. The next exponential, right, is global climate change. And so what you see here is kind of the latest estimates by the UN. It's the median. All of these are kind of the median. So there are worst case scenarios in every case, right? But in this particular case, it forecasts by 2100 a rough increase of about 2 degrees Celsius or 4 degrees Fahrenheit. Okay, now that doesn't sound like very much. Like every time I hear those numbers, I'm like 2 degrees, right? But when you take that as a global average and you say, what does that mean for sea level, right? Well, it's about 2 feet, right? Locally, like for New York, it could be 4 to 5 feet. That will redraw maps, right? Big changes ahead, and it's not like it's going to stop there. The third exponential is population. Now, for a while, it looked like population was going to S off a little earlier, around 9 billion, but now it's looking like it's on course for about 11 billion. Now, one of the implications of that is a population of 11 billion requires energy that will continue to be exponential well through 2030, right? So when all of these scientists and these thinkers are pessimistic, it's because any one of these exponentials is cause for concern, right? You take them all three together, and you got guys like Martin Rees saying, I give you 50-50 odds, right? Not so good. In terms of what is the root cause, like why are these things happening, right? E.O. Wilson, I think, has summarized it better than anyone else I've heard, right? And his thing is, we have Paleolithic emotions, medieval institutions, and godlike technology. I think that captures it so eloquently. And so I'm going to paraphrase it. This is my paraphrase, right, of his analysis. I think the root cause of our problems, our brains are running pleistocene software, right? So the Pleistocene is about 2.5 million years ago to about 10,000 years ago. And so during that time, we were hunter-gatherers, right? We evolved lots of behaviors, lots of cognitive biases, lots of things that we do that made great sense during that time, right? That had adaptive benefit, right? But what were features then are bugs now, right? So back then, it was a feature to have immediate gratification, right? If you're running along and you happen to stumble upon something that has high fat and high sugar, you gobble it up, immediate gratification. If you don't gobble it up, something else, some other critter, some other tribe will come along and eat it out from under you, right? But you take that instinct and you put it in a modern brain and you stumble into a cheesecake factory, right? And you're done for, right? It was a feature, but now it's a bug. And so what's the solution, right? Lots of people talk about solutions. We got to go to Mars. We got to do geoengineering. I mean, these kind of Hail Mary, long shot type scenarios, right? That just, to me, are just not going to happen, right? The blunt reality is those things are just not going to happen. Okay, this is something we can do, right? There is something we can do about it. And that is, we need an Anthropocene upgrade to our Pleistocene software, right? The Anthropocene is the era that we live in now, right? It's the era that really starts when humans started being the main impact on the planet. Okay? We need to take the bugs in our Pleistocene software, remove them, and enhance the software that we have, right? And so that's the upgrade. We want to enhance, and we want to debug. Okay, so this is how we're approaching the problem at Avenues. So it's a school that I work at, right? This is, for many of you, it sounds like there's a lot of software technology types in here, right? This is a generic computer stack, right? And just two things on this metaphor that I want to get across that are relevant for us here. The first is, the further you go down the stack, right, the harder it is to change stuff. The higher up you go, the easier it is, right? So if you take out your smartphone and you're looking at it, right, the hardware is basically, can't change it. Firmware, usually they update it once at the manufacturer, then it goes out. But the operating system, the applications, right, you're periodically updating these things. Okay. The second thing that's super important about this is if we want to apply an upgrade to this stack, right, the layer that we apply it at, so if we want to upgrade, let's say, the operating system, not only does the operating system benefit from that, but everything up stack benefits, right? That's important because we're going to extend this analogy to the brain, to what we call the cognitive stack. Now, what we know about intelligence is roughly 50% is genetic. It's hereditary, right? A lot of my education colleagues do not like hearing that, but that is the best science that we have, and I don't think they need to sulk. That gives us 50%, right? That's a lot to work with. Now, right above the genetics, you have this layer called executive functions. Now, what's exciting about executive functions is up until just 20 years ago or so, that was thought to be genetic too. In other words, it was inalterable. Couldn't do anything about it. It's kind of like firmware, right? It's not easily fixed, but it looks like we can actually change it. It is the underlying skill set for fluid intelligence. So when we talk about IQ, executive functions underlie things like attentional control and problem solving and impulse control, right? All of these really important things long term. Now, I said they're hard to change, right? It turns out that not everybody can have their executive functions altered. There's a sensitive period from about 2 years of age to late adolescence. So that means we're screwed, right? I mean, that's what that means. So to think about how to answer Sagan's question, we really have to be thinking in the same way, right? We have to be thinking about future generations. We can't do it for ourselves, but we can do it for others. Above that, you have metacognition, thinking about thinking, right? So, and self-awareness. So I know if there is a bag of Cheetos in my house, I will eat the entire bag. That's self-knowledge. That's good, right? Way I can manage that is I don't put Cheetos in my house, right? I avoid that. Those kind of metacognitive skills are also things that can be taught, and they're powerful in debugging. Then you have skills, and then you have facts, right? So skills called procedural knowledge, facts, declarative knowledge. Now, what's interesting about this metaphor in education is education typically focuses on the top of the stack, right? Where you get the least bang for the buck. What we know about the stack is if we can apply an upgrade lower down the stack, we can affect that layer and everything above, right? Everything that is up stack. So if we're going to do an anthropocene upgrade, that's a good entry point. That's where we want to start. And so this is how we're doing it at Avenues. This is the experiment we're running. There are 3 basic executive functions. It's working memory, which is the ability to hold stuff in your head and solve problems, right? Cognitive flexibility, your ability to kind of quickly shift mindsets, change hats in doing problem solving. And inhibitory control, right? That's the thing preventing you from eating the cheesecake at the Cheesecake Factory, or at least delaying gratification. Now, those are the executive functions. To get to the executive functions, right, we need vectors. We need a way in to practice and develop those things. And it turns out certain thinking skills can do that. So below each of, I keep pointing down here like you can see what I'm pointing at. It's a lack of empathy. So up here, you can see the 3 executive functions and then the corresponding thinking skills. So for cognitive flexibility, creativity, empathy, critical thinking, right? And the idea is that when we're designing our curriculum, when we're designing units of instruction, we are deliberate and intentional about incorporating these types of practice activities in everything we do across all academic disciplines, right? Good teachers do a lot of this already on their own. They don't have the framework. The idea, though, is how do we scale it so that everybody does it all the time? Because it's so low in the cognitive stack, this is hard to change. It's not like memorizing your number sets. It takes hundreds or thousands of hours of practice, typically over multiple years, right? So this is something you can do 1 year and get a big effect. You've got to do it for a long period of time. Okay? So the cognitive stack and applying our upgrade to the executive function layer is how we enhance. Now the question is, how do we debug? Now, some of these cognitive biases may be familiar to you, right? These are common things. There's lots of books and articles written about them. These are the things that our brain just fails at, right? The classic kinds of biases and things. These are pleistocene bugs. That is what that is, right? These are bugs in our software. If you were software engineers and you were shipping code with all of those bugs, you would be fired. You would be sued, right? But in this paradigm, in this metaphor, that's what we do in education. We know these are defects in thinking. We know it. And year after year, we graduate students who continue to commit them. And if you connect the dots between the kinds of things that are going on in those exponential trends, right? So when you say global warming, well, it's going to require international cooperation. It's going to require cross-disciplinary understanding. It's going to require all of these things. We don't have the software for that. We don't have the software for that. That's the problem. And so our goal, right, in what we can achieve by both debugging those biases and enhancing our software is to become increasingly transgenerational, right? So right now, our pleistocene software has us thinking within our lifetime. When you start thinking 2-3 generations out, it's like, why am I thinking about that, right? It's not in our nature. That has to be developed. The ability to be transnational in their orientation, right? Tribalism, the idea of in-group, out-group, us versus them, it's in our nature. It's in our software, right? To get to a point where we're saying there is no out-group, right? The in-group is everybody on the planet, right? That's something that has to be developed. It doesn't come naturally to us. And then lastly, to deal with this accelerating change of technology, we have to be transdisciplinary. It's not enough, right, to become an academic specialist. You got to be good across the disciplines, and you need to know how to synthesize. And so, in conclusion, I wanted to kind of try to relate to you what I think, contrary to what the movie's response to the question was really quite lame, so I didn't want to use that. So I tried to think to myself, how would super intelligent aliens respond? And every time I think about that in my head, I always think of Confucius, right? It's like, Confucius must be an alien. And so I want to end with that, right? So Confucius said, if planning for a year, plant rice, planning for 10 years, plant trees, planning for 100 years, educate children. I think the aliens would make one small change to that. And they would say, look, by some estimates, we only have 100 years. So we need to get on it, right? We need to start doing this now, and we need to make sure that in the future of education, the mental tool set we're giving our kids allows them to save the world. Thank you.